Hello everyone, and welcome to our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion project. My name is Taylor Artis, and I worked on this project with Culver Benton. So the states that we chose to focus on for our project were Florida and the great state of Texas. So let's get into Florida first. So some stats on Florida. Florida is the third most populous state in the country, coming in at about 22.6 million people. Some racial demographics, almost 77% of the state is white, 27% of folks are Hispanic or Latino, 17% are Black or African American, 3% are Asian, 2.5% are biracial or multiracial, and 0.5% are American Indian, and 0.1% are Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Sex demographics, just over half of the folks are female and just under half of the folks are male. Educationally, important to note this is based on people that are over the age of 25. Almost 90% of people have graduated high school, and about a third of folks possess a bachelor's degree or advanced degree. Economically, the median household income is a little less than $70,000 a year, but 13% of the population is below the federal poverty line. So the Florida higher education system is a public university system that has 12 universities. They are listed there for you. I'm not going to read them all. But the flagship universities, the universities that are most popular, University of Florida in Gainesville, which you've likely heard of, has about 60,000 students, and Florida State University in Tallahassee has about 45,000 students. There are a couple of land-grant institutions, Florida A&M University and the University of Florida, and there are 74 community college and career colleges open for enrollment. So what EDI challenges are the folks in Florida facing in higher ed? Well, if you go back about a year ago to May 2023, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis passed a DEI funding ban. A quote from when he began to talk about this ban is, if you look at the way this has actually been implemented across the country, this meaning DEI, DEI is better viewed as standing for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, which is a very interesting soundbite. So this bill that he was trying to pass was going to ban the teaching of the critical race theory, that's CRT, and it was aimed to crack down on woke indoctrination in schools. It banned the use of state and federal tax funds for DEI programs, activities, and policies. It also required the removal of all DEI-related dean positions, only some of whom of the folks that were in those positions remained employed. So on January 24th, 2024, the Florida Board of Governors gave their final approval to ban the use of state and federal tax funds for DEI in all state colleges, including those that are outside the public system that I named a few slides ago. They consider DEI anything that categorizes individuals based on race or sex for the purpose of differential or preferential treatment. So I talked a little bit about the removal of DEI dean positions. So what that looks like, in January 2023, 9 of 12 University of Florida academic colleges had deans that in their job description was something related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As of January 2024, a year later, 8 of those deans do still work for the University of Florida, but none of them hold the same position. So for example, the former assistant dean for diversity, inclusion, and global affairs in the College of Nursing is now the associate dean for community engagement and global affairs. The previous assistant dean for DEI in the business school, that role was limited in its entirety. The new College of Florida. So it's important to recognize that DeSantis' goal was to directly impact the new College of Florida, and he actually had a press conference relating to his DEI ban on the school's grounds. So what a way to make a statement. He accused the school's leadership of overemphasizing DEI, the critical race theory, and gender ideology, which he characterized as not what a liberal arts education should be. So in order to combat this, he appointed an entirely new board of trustees and tasked them with overhauling the university to align more with a conservative agenda. Something that's very interesting is that this new board of trustees requested $400 million of money from the state of Florida to make what he wanted to happen, and that was very quickly approved, the distribution of $400 million. So let's get into how this is actually impacting students. I did break it down into a few institutions. Obviously, the impacts are felt at all the public institutions and state colleges in Florida, but these were ones I was able to find really specific and pointed examples for that I wanted to share. So at the New College of Florida, two really significant staff members were terminated: the diversity chief and the academic librarian, who were both conveniently members of the LGBTQ community. The school no longer has gender-neutral restrooms, and highly visible student leaders, like students who are admissions ambassadors and were going to be present at like new student days and things like that, were asked to, or requested to, remove pins with things like Black Lives Matter or Pride from their shirts and backpacks. At Florida State University, they had some removal of courses regarding social issues. So FSU had a course called Principles of Sociology, which had historically informed students with knowledge regarding social issues. That's now gone, and it's been replaced with an American history class that will be, quote, an accurate and factual account of the nation's past. And that's from that same article that's cited there. They also shut down their DEI office. So that DEI office has now been replaced with what they call the Office of Equal Opportunity, Compliance, and Engagement. And the two positions that formerly had DEI in their titles that worked there, those positions have been, they now focus solely on university compliance. And at the University of Florida, a professor named Kenneth Nunn noted that he sees that most of the African American faculty they've left or they're planning to leave in the near future. It's something that he refers to as the brain drain. And I think it's just important to talk about this because studies have shown that Black, Latino, Asian, and international students all fare better when their own group is represented at their institution. We see this in increased graduation rates for students of minoritized identities, when they have that faculty and staff representation. And so we can assume that as Black people are starting to leave, decreasing that diversity, what diversity there is at these institutions, that likely other races and other minoritized identity groups will follow, just overall decreasing the amount of minority faculty and staff representation.
All right, now jumping into Texas's demographics. It is the second largest state in the country, population-wise. It has about 29 million people. Right in front of it at number 1 is California. Right behind it at number 3 is Florida. Racially speaking, this is a predominantly white state, with 50% of the population identifying with white, 40% identifying with Hispanic or Latino. This logically makes sense because it shares a border with Mexico. One border that is talked about a lot in politics and throughout the news. In addition to that, there are 9% of people who identify with Black or African American, and then 1% with other races that were mentioned. Talking about sex demographics here, it is a pretty even state, as with alignment with the rest of the country. It is about 50-50. However, people identifying as female do tend to outweigh people who identify as male here by about 1%, give or take a few. Educationally speaking, based on people who are 25 or older, most of those people do have high school degrees, with 86% of them holding one. But that drops almost 50% with getting a bachelor's degree. So only about 1 in 3 people in the great state of Texas have a bachelor's degree or higher. And economically speaking, the median household income is about $72,284, and 14% of the population is below the poverty line, which is all very important to know when we're talking about Texas. All right, speaking about Texas, we also want to talk about the higher education system. Within Texas, there are about 35 total public university systems and private institutions. The two largest in Texas are the University of Texas system, otherwise known as the UT system, and as well as the Texas A&M system, otherwise known as the TAMU system. Within these two systems, they have an interesting history of how they've been funded, as they are included in the Texas Texas state constitution through the Permanent University Fund, which in 1876, the Texas Constitution allocated land in western Texas that would allow the state to lease that to farmers and gas companies as well as oil companies to then make money off of, which they could sell to farms to graze or other things like that. And that money then is used to partially fund these university systems, with the UT system receiving 2/3 of the money from the Permanent University Fund, and then TAMU system receiving about 1/3 of the funds from the Permanent University Fund. And this could be a very interesting topic to talk about as we look at how oil and gas companies have contributed to the environment and things like that. Nonetheless, the flagship universities of both systems for the UT system is the University of Texas at Austin, commonly referred to as the University of Texas, their mascot being the Longhorns. They have about 50,000 people that attend that university. For the Texas A&M system, we have Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, commonly referred to as the Aggies, with about 54,000 students there. Other notable institutions to take into consideration here when talking about the Texas higher education system is the University of Houston system, University of North Texas, Texas State, Texas Tech, and the Texas Women's University systems. In addition to that, there are about 85 two-year institutions, which include community and technical colleges across the state, with the majority of them being in the larger cities like Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, in those areas. Moving on to talking about the EDI challenges in Texas higher education, the most recent one that we want to talk about is one law that was signed into law in June 2023 by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. This law is commonly referred to Senate Bill 17 or SB 17, and it put a ban on spending state funds on EDI offices and staff, diversity statements, giving preference based on characteristics such as race, sex, or national origin, as well as mandatory diversity training at public colleges. This recently just took effect as of January 1st, 2024, so institutions in Texas only had about a half a year, 6 months to figure out what they were going to do with this law being put into place. Specifically with this, that if universities in Texas did not comply to this, there would be legal and financial ramifications if they didn't, as there are audits happening to them with this law in effect. So they kind of receive an audit about what their funding is going towards, and if they are doing anything with this, they could face these ramifications, of course. This is very interesting as this took a couple tries to get through. There were a bunch of other bills, about, I want to say 4 other bills that were tried to get through the lawmaking process and ultimately failed or just could not get through the session with that as well. This one did have to go back to a committee to make amendments and find compromises, and then was eventually made its way to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. More to come about the impact on students with it. SB 17 has had a large impact on students in Texas, specifically students with minoritized identities. In a recent article from USA Today by Kepner and Jimenez in 2024, a UT Austin junior was a part of the Fearless Leadership Institute, which primarily supported Black and brown women in empowering them to become leaders while as a student at UT Austin. And after the president of UT Austin announced the discontinuation of some programs, this institute was then no longer on UT's server or their website. So that had a direct impact on her as she was very active in this institute. Another UT Austin senior said that in order for any marginalized students to be treated fairly at the University of Texas, because they weren't accepted for so long, diversity and identity-specific programs and partnerships were critical in developing students' sense of belonging on campus, where majority of students were white. So this is having a large impact on students because they are no longer feeling like a sense of belonging because their identity-specific programs and centers are being taken away from them, which provided a sense of belonging for a lot of students across those institutions, specifically with UT Austin being one of the largest institutions in the state with over 50,000 students. This is having a large impact on them. And then overall, because of that, in true Gen Z fashion, students are mobilizing to make social change, whether that is through protests or anything like that. Gen Z is really taking it personally, as is typical, and as a member of Gen Z, I can say we do, and making sure that their voices are heard on this issue.
Something we thought was important to highlight is the community and student response, specifically in anti-DEI legislation protests. So in the state of Florida, there are a couple of notable protests that are really from the recent past. March 8th, 2024, at the University of Florida, students, staff, and community members protested outside of their alumni hall, chanting, "Get DeSantis out of our campus," and "BOT has got to go," BOT meaning the Board of Trustees. March 27th, recently, also at University of Florida, students and professors gathered outside of their union where the Board of Governors was meeting, and they held up signs that said things like "DEI saves lives." In Texas, you see some similar type protests, but one starting all the way back almost a year ago, or a little over a year ago now, at UT Austin, which is the largest campus there in the University of Texas system. They were advocating for more funding for multicultural programs and increased faculty of color at the university. And very much so recently, March 25th, there was a protest at Texas A&M, and they just were saying that they wanted resources that they needed to help students of minoritized identities.
All right, so looking at the Stop Woke Act in Florida as well as SB 17 in Texas, two concepts related to social justice and inclusion really come to the forefront of our minds. The first one being power, as students with minoritized identities feel less than and as they don't matter. And then specifically with this is also looking at the legislatures, so the people making laws and the power they hold over everyone else in this state, as well as possibly even the privileges that they hold to be able to get into those positions of power and therefore then impose their ideas on everyone else in this state with their belief of not thinking that EDI programs do not belong on university colleges and campuses. Hegemony also comes into play here, which refers to the control of ideology of a society where the dominant group maintains power by imposing their ideology on everyone. Also kind of intertwines with power there too, specifically, like I said, with the Stop Woke Act, in that the goal was to eliminate race-related curriculum, to stop, quote, brainwashing people, yet combats this problem by the complete removal of facts and events from history. So we really see that in Florida with the legislatures there and people in power of laws, making sure that their thoughts and ideology about what is good and bad is being imposed on everyone. And specifically in Texas too, eliminating all the EDI items in higher education institutions. Like I mentioned earlier, it has legal and financial repercussions for violations of this. So this literally is punishing people for not going along with the ideology of those in positions of power. So these two concepts really stick out and really push towards making these states and institutions in these states not being able to be socially inclusive. It makes students with minoritized identities feel as though they matter or that they have a place on campus, which can really have lasting effects for all students in both of these states. When we look forward to what we can do as student affairs professionals, there are a couple things that come to mind that we thought of. First, one, we can educate ourselves. Before learning and taking on the great state of Texas and Florida ourselves, I personally did not have much clue about what was going on in Texas and Florida. but now after doing some research and educating myself on SB 17 as well as the Stop Woke Act, I can now see how that is impacting students there, and how we can help support even maybe some of our colleagues in those states. I know from being a part of ACPA that a lot of my friends or people I know, with some of them being in Texas and Florida, it's good to reach out to them and let them know that we're there for them. We can also advocate for those whose voices are still being silenced, specifically leverage and utilize majority identities. So those who hold those majority identities continue to be voices for our minoritized people, as well as continue providing safe spaces at our institutions and be support resources by knowing who your resources are if your capacity is exhausted. Even though in these states sometimes people may not be able to visibly say that they or show support for students with minoritized identities, I think it goes a long way to say that you are, and let students know with minoritized identities that you are a safe space for them to come to and get support. Otherwise, at least knowing who those people are on your campuses so that you can have students talk with them as well. Of course, if it is safe to, we would encourage people to join protests against anti-DEI legislation, whether it's here in your small communities or even in bigger communities. Those can always have an impact on how we can change what is going through our legislature. And then the last idea we had is consider running for local or campus shared governance offices. I speak from this with a personal experience. I recently ran for city council here in Stevens Point. Although I withdrew early in the race, I think it goes to say that it is possible and that you can still have a voice in your community. And when you have a voice in your community and knowing how important social justice and inclusion is, if you can really help bring that to the community, we can better not only campus community, but the surrounding cities, communities of where our campuses are, to make sure that people with minoritized identities feel safe on our campuses as well as in the cities that our campuses reside. And if local office maybe isn't your thing yet, also consider running or joining your campus shared governance offices, specifically at UW-Stevens Point. I know we have a common council, which is our like faculty, staff, student government kind of equivalent. And being on there, you're allowed to propose legislation, you're allowed to be a voice for students on there, really, and help make changes on campus. And I think that's just as important too, when we're looking at creating spaces for our students to thrive and be who they are. Getting yourselves in positions of power to advocate and use your voice for students so that they can have safe spaces and feel as though they matter on campuses is really, really important. So a lot of things you can do. So if you can only do a couple things, that's great. If you can only do one, even better. Do what you think is good for you, and do the best you can at it.
So we have a couple questions that we want to post to the group, and I will definitely put these into like the text body in our submission. But our first one, a little lengthy, we apologize, is knowing that this legislation, this meaning anti-DEI legislation, may pick up traction and be enacted similarly in other states. As current student affairs professionals, and perhaps some of you want to be future faculty, how do we continue to encourage students, especially those with minoritized identities, to enter higher education, continue, get advanced degrees, knowing that the very places that they have to pay their money to for these degrees don't support them in their identity, don't support them with resources, and don't want to support them in their development as a college student. Second one, as a student affairs professional, do you feel it's our responsibility to proactively educate students on anti-DEI legislation, or do you think that may be more harmful than beneficial, and then why or why not? The motive behind this question is, from what I've seen in Wisconsin, my students don't really know about the recent legislation that was signed here about also moving towards this anti-DEI track, and I wonder if we bring it to their attention, especially students with minoritized identities, I think that they'll feel attacked, rightfully so. And so is it our responsibility to burden them with this knowledge, or kind of let them live in this blissful ignorance? Which, I think that sounds rough, but I think it's a good thing for us to be discussing. And here are our references. Thank you so much for listening.